Jody, did I hear you say you have a big map?
Yes.
Thank you.
Right now, Tom is still representing the Plan Commission, but we will need to elect a chair and vice chair, and I believe the only ones are you and George. Rick can't because he's on the township board.
Trying to dump me already.
No, not Rick, but,
Jake,
Kate.
I think you have to serve.
Okay. Yes, sir.
He has to serve either, so it's the two
I
of
figured
you.
you were stuck with me. I'm here for the rest of the day. I apologize for the delay, but we're busy getting the cameras working.
Okay, I'd like to call to order the January 9th, 2018 Board of Zoning Appeals. Let's do the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We can introduce our membership. We've got, at the end, we've got Jake Lake, who's a new member of the board, Rick Steiner, who's representing the Township Board, the main board, myself, member at large, George Welling, member at large, Tom Zybeck, representing the Planning Commission, and we got Jody Rector and Dennis Kohler, representing the Township, Phil Goldsmith, our attorney, and Karen Kincaid, representing the Township. Karen, would you call roll, please?
Mr. Lake?
Here.
Mr. Zebeck?
Here.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Welling?
Here.
Mr. Potter?
Here.
All present?
Okay, thank you. First order of business here is the election of the Board of Zoning Appeals officers for this year. Nominations?
Yes, I'd like to nominate you, Mr. Potter, as the chairman.
I'll second.
Okay. Do we need to roll call vote or just ayes?
Any other nominations?
Okay, any other nominations?
And you have to...
Seeing none?
You
Will
have-
you accept?
Yes, I will accept.
Okay, now we vote.
Okay. All in favor?
Roll
Roll
call.
call vote.
Oh, roll call, okay.
Mr. Welling?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Zebeck?
Aye.
Mr. Lake?
Yes.
Mr. Potter?
Aye.
Motion carried.
Okay. Nominations for vice chairman.
I'd like to nominate George Welling.
I'll second that.
Thank you.
Any other nominations? Nominations are closed. Karen, roll call vote, please.
Mr. Lake?
Yes.
Mr. Potter?
Yes.
Mr. Zebeck?
Yes.
Mr. Steiner?
Yes.
Mr. Welling?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Okay. Need to ask for a motion to approve the agenda for tonight.
Motion to,
One more.
Excuse me if I may. I just wanted to mention, if anyone here is in the audience, if you've picked up the agenda, the agenda is correct as it is being presented. Just wanted to make note that item B has been withdrawn and will not be on the agenda this evening. So if you are here for that, nothing is going to be discussed for that particular item.
motion to approve the agenda is submitted minus item B.
I second that.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion carried. Approval of the minutes for November 6th, which would have been our last meeting.
I move that we accept the agenda of of November 6, 2017.
Meeting minutes.
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 I'll second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
I'll
Okay,
abstain as I was absent.
right. Okay. Okay, the next item on the agenda is new business. I'd like a motion to open the public hearing regarding the appeal of Veris Development Corporation, 28454 Woodward Avenue, Royal Oak, Michigan 48067, requesting a variance to allow a reduced parking requirement of 22 spaces and to allow parking within the front yard setback per section 400.1904, off-street parking requirements. 2, a variance to allow trash enclosures to be located within the front yard per section 400.1303, site development standard for C3 general business districts. And 3, a variance to allow loading and unloading to be located within the front yard per section 400.1906, off-street loading and unloading in a C3 general commercial zoning district on vacant land described as parcel number 5802-032-05600, otherwise known as 7386 Secor Road, located at the corner of Secor and Stearns Roads.
Make a motion, we open the public hearing.
Support.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Karen, would you like to?
Yes. Again, the applicant is Veris Development Group out of Royal Oak, Michigan. The owner is Ahead Investments in Jackson, Michigan. Again, the variance location is on the southeast corner of Secor and Stearns Road, and the parcel consists of 1.356 acres. The applicant is seeking several variances for a proposed development of an 8,548 square foot multi-unit building with a drive-through facility on approximately 1.356 acre parcel, which is now vacant, located on the southeast corner of Secor and Stearns. That is the previous location of Buddy's. The submitted site plan indicates the proposed parking is within the front yard setback, and the proposed unit uses will be 2 restaurants, with 1 restaurant having a drive-through access and 2 units having some type of a retail store. Regarding the off-street parking requirements, per section 400-1904, off-street parking requirements, off-street parking shall not be permitted within a minimum front yard setback and is calculated by by usable floor space for the uses indicated on the proposed site plan. However, per section 400.1800, which is the schedule of regulations, under footnote K, it states, unless prohibited by the regulations for any specific zoning district or as otherwise prohibited by this ordinance, and as may modified by the requirements of the Planning Commission to make parking areas less visible and obtrusive to nearby streets and roads. In residentially zoned properties, parking may be permitted within the front yard setback, provided that an area within the front yard remains as lawn or landscape area, which is equal to at least 50% of the area of the required front yard. We've provided you with a color-coded map trying to sort through what these variances are, so if you have any questions, please ask for some clarification. The front yard setback on your map is identified within the green box, and the parking may be permitted within the 50% of the required front yard setback, which we have identified in blue on the map, so long as the remaining 50% remains as lawn or landscape area. The remainder of the area within the green outline would be the 50%. The applicant is seeking a variance to encroach into the required front or 50% lawn or landscape area, and that is identified as yellow on your map, along the west side of Secor Road, immediately adjacent to the existing sidewalk, thus eliminating any area for lawn or landscape area, as plantings are not permitted within the road right-of-way, which is identified. It might not look pink on your map, but it is a pink line that we have identified as the road right-of-way on the plan that was submitted. And although they can't place plantings, grass can be planted within the road right-of-way. The applicant has indicated there is a 9.8-foot separation from the curb along Secor Road and the proposed parking lot, with a 5-foot wide sidewalk included within the 9.8 feet, thus providing approximately 4.8 feet of lawn area between the sidewalk and Secor Road. That is a setback from the curb identified within purple outline on the plan. We provided that. Required parking. And we are using the parking calculations for the uses that were presented as the restaurants and the retail. Retail parking requires 1 space for every 100 feet or square feet of usable floor space, up to 5,000 square feet. A drive-through restaurant will, with seating, requires 1 space for each 50 square feet of usable floor space, plus 10 front-to-back spaces for the drive-through window. It should be noted that they have provided the 10 stacking spaces. That is not part of the variance. They are meeting the ordinance requirement on that. Lastly, an establishment for sale and consumption on the premises of beverages, food, or refreshment requires 1 space for each 75 square feet of usable floor space. In accordance with the zoning ordinance, the required parking spaces calculated on the total usable floor space as provided by the applicant and identified on the submitted plan is 68 required parking spaces. I broke that, and Jody broke that down. It should be noted that the calculations are for the parking of vehicles only and do not include the required 10 stacking spaces. The proposed site plan indicates there are only 46 total parking spaces, thus requiring the variance request of 22 parking spaces. The applicant has indicated in the submitted letter, and that was included as well in your packet, the proposed location of the parking within the front yard will ensure adequate parking for the development regardless of the tenant. And this proposed condition is seen through the Secor Road corridor and would be in line with the existing nature of the neighborhood. We did also include an aerial map to show, to identify where the parking is on the surrounding, the setbacks. So that is included in your packet as well. It should be noted that when calculating the total required parking spaces, the calculation is based on the uses proposed to the planning department, and the determined number of required spaces would be needed if all units are filled to capacity at the same time. Therefore, while reducing the number of parking spaces may not become problematic with the proposed uses or even with future uses, there is always that possibility if a use that requires a greater number of parking spaces is proposed by subsequent tenants. That is not to say parking space requirements will become an issue if a variance is granted to reduce the number of spaces for the proposed uses. However, possible future uses should be taken into consideration, as this intersection is not within a village overlay district and does not offer a shared parking option with neighboring businesses and/or on-street parking. Section 400-1904 off-street parking requirements for this zoning district has been included in your packet for perusal. It should be kept in mind that this site will not lend itself to a number of listed permitted uses due to the parcel size. Regarding the loading and unloading and trash enclosure, per Section 413-03C, Site Development Standards for C3 General Commercial Zoning District, trash enclosures shall be incorporated into the overall design of the building and landscaping so the visual and acoustic impact of these functions are minimized and shall be constructed to be in addition to the loading and unloading regulation requirements of Section 1906 off-street loading and unloading. States loading and unloading shall be provided for inside a building, structure, or part thereof, or in the rear yard or side yard not facing a street. The applicant has shown the proposed location of the trash enclosure as located to the far west end of the structure facing Secor Road. It should be verified where the loading and unloading areas will be provided and access for loading and unloading for each unit, as it has not been noted on the submitted site plan, and a variance is being sought to allow loading and unloading within the front yard. Should the variance request be granted, the variances required are a variance to allow parking within the front yard setback, a variance of 22 required parking spaces with the proposed uses, a variance to allow loading and unloading within the front yard, and a variance to allow trash enclosure within the front yard.
Thank you, Karen. Okay, is there a representative on this that would like to approach the podium, introduce yourself, give your name and address, and any additional comments that Karen didn't?
Good evening, members of the Zoning Board of Appeals and staff. We appreciate your time this evening. My name is Joseph Paluzzi with Veris Development Group, 28454 Woodward Avenue in Royal Oak. It's good to be back in front of you. Some faces are familiar to me, and some are new. We were here about, I think 5 years ago, when we developed the northeast corner of this intersection, and we still remain the owners of that entire parcel. We did the O'Reillys, the Walgreen, the Bank of America, and the Taco Bell site. So today we come before you with the opposite corner, the southeast corner. And about 3 years ago, we started working on this project. And after doing extensive due diligence, we unfortunately were made very much aware of the very burdensome environmental impact that this site had had. This was a site that was heavily contaminated with petroleum. And through our efforts and relationships with the MDEQ over the course of 3 years' time, I can now tell you that this site has been cleaned up and it's ready for development. So we're obviously very excited about that. The variances that we're seeking this evening, we have Jake Modesto from Stonefield Engineering with us to just address each of those from our standpoint and give you some reasoning behind what we're proposing. And obviously, if you have any questions, we're here to answer them to the best of our ability. So we appreciate your time and consideration this evening. Jake Modesto.
Good evening, members of the board. Jake Modesto, Stonefield Engineering Design. You guys all see the board over here? You want me to move it?
Please. Thank you. Just closer to the center here. There we go. Thank you.
We're in front of you tonight seeking relief for 3 items. Those are being the trash and loading within the front yard, the parking within that Secor Road setback, and the number of parking spaces on site. Although it seems these are 3 separate items, they're really one. When we look at this site as a whole, the site itself is narrow in reference to the other parcels that are happening on Secor Road. So the parcel we're developing is the parcel in red. You can see, but this is our parcel in red, and the rest of the corridor has this depth from Secor Road. Another limitation of this property is we are a double frontage property or a corner lot where we have to provide that front yard setback from both Secor and Stearns Road. So that does limit our developable area for this site. The other thing it does limit is the location of where we place the curb cuts. Let's see here. This is just a colorized rendering of what we put together, what the site would look like with this application. You can see here we've placed the curb cuts as far away from that intersection of Stearns and Secor as possible to provide proper adequate spacing for the driveways. And that really is a limiting factor when we look at designing the internal site circulation, because that depicts where we have to put our drive aisles and parking spaces. Before we made any submissions to the board tonight, we did meet with the township professionals, fire department, county drain, and road commissions to put this application in front of them and get their thoughts. And they did feel this was the proper application to put in front of you. So we did go through those exercises before we made this application in front of you. Our office will be proposing a decorative gate for the trash enclosure that's located here in that front yard setback. Frank, do you have a... So I have samples of this, what this will look like. So it's going to add another architectural element to the facade as you come off Secor Road.
As long as we're on that subject, I'd like to go ahead and ask now. So are you going to have like a partial block wall that comes out on the sides and then the gate?
Yeah, so it's going to match the building facade. So it'll be really one element, and then we'll be providing this gate to give it another sense of depth across that roadway. The last item we want to talk about tonight is the parking spaces. We have 68 is required by code. 46 are proposed on site. Now the ordinance reads it's 1 space for 100 usable floor area for the retail, 1 space for 50 or 75 square feet for the restaurant or restaurants with drive-through facilities. Now, these numbers are far exceed the national standard for development of like a neighborhood type development like this, which is about 1 per 200 square feet. You can see that this development, we have multiple tenants. This does fit into this having a neighborhood type development, and the tenants we're looking to place here will have different peak hours. So when it comes to a development like this, we have the opportunity for shared parking. So essentially what this means is one person can drive into the site, park in one of the spaces, and use both retail and restaurant, maybe all the restaurants, hopefully, kind of the goal here, to put it, so really what we're accounting for is 2 parking spaces by code, when really we'd be essentially using 1. So we feel it's double counting, if you will, and that the 46 parking spaces will be adequate for the proposed tenants. The board has to grant relief via 3 criteria. We feel we do meet these 3 criteria. Number 1 being the narrowness, size, and shape of the lot. As I talked about before, it is a double frontage, and we have that restriction from Secor Road. The next is a topographic condition or an extraordinary situation. As Joe mentioned before, this site was contaminated, and we've since taken care of that, but that was a restriction that we had on the property, so the mitigation had to happen. And number 3 is the hardship that provides relief without substantial detriment to the public good. We do feel that the benefits associated with the development far exceed any detriments. Our office feels this development is in line with the master plan and that all variances requested tonight are justifiable. Joe, if you want to take anything else. Yeah.
Okay. I think we can discuss all the variances at once, but we'll be voting on them individually. Okay, all righty. Okay, are there any questions from the board?
I'm not sure what the national standard is. I know what the ordinance in our township is regards to parking. So kind of looking at the planning commission, if our ordinance is out of sorts or if we're in kind of, I'm gonna call it kind of unison or alignment with what the national average would be. The parking is my main concern here. And I know that we talk about what the proposed uses are and the usable space. So there could be some, differences in the calculations and the numbers there. So it's pretty close, but those are some things that I'd want to get cleared up to understand if the parking is really a concern or not.
And I'm sorry, I do not know what the national average is.
Doesn't matter, we go by our ordinance.
Right. And as I said, when we calculate uses, we calculate the uses for each individual, which may or may not be required, all at the same time. Depends if it's at full capacity. All of the units are at full capacity. So when we calculate, we do base on each individual use and assume that it's always going to be at full capacity.
Also related to the parking, how many, does anybody know offhand how many handicap spaces are going to be required?
1 for each 25 or fraction thereof. So if they had 52 parking spaces, they would be required to have 3. If they have 46, they're required to have 2.
2?
And I think that's what they're proposing.
That's correct, we're proposing 2 handicap parking spaces.
It's on the site map.
If I could comment on the parking. So what we concentrate on is obviously national tenant representation, and we build our developments around relationships that we have with national tenants, i.e. the opposite northeast corner. So one thing that we're very sensitive to is the long-term success of the developments that we build. So if we underpark or underservice one of our retail centers that we build, we obviously shoot ourselves in the foot for long-term success. So when we place tenants in smaller neighborhood retail centers like the one that we're proposing before you this evening, it's critical for the ultimate success of not only each of the tenants in the building, but for our long-term success and that of the whole of the community, that those tenants are serviced properly, first and foremost by parking. So as much as we're here this evening and the numbers can be a bit skewed, and perhaps misrepresent what the true need is, we are very sensitive to that, because ultimately it's ours. And if our tenants are not successful, our project is not successful. So we feel very, very comfortable in what we're proposing before you this evening, based on the tenant mix that we feel will bring to this particular site. Hope that may bring some clarity.
Sure.
Thank you.
I'm concerned about the parking as well, and I was kind of think, okay, you got 46 spaces. If you got 4 employees per business, that takes you down to 30, and a couple of handicap takes you down to 28, so you got 7 spaces per business. Didn't seem like a lot.
And the intent here, once again, is even though we identify as restaurants, these are fast casual dining facilities. So these are not facilities where you're going in and spending hours at a dinner table. This is fast casual dining and fast service. And the types of tenants that we're placing in here are quick trips. This is a neighborhood facility that the time that you're to spend in these buildings and the footprints being relatively small, we're not looking to have long-term stay in the parking lot.
Might add on, we think about this in peak parking, so the tenants that we're looking at or potentially looking at, for example, the drive-through, that would peak during the morning hours. The restaurant would peak during the lunch hours, and the retail would be in the PM hours. So there might be 7 individually spaced out, but reality is that one would have 14 while one had 2. So that the actual breakdown for a peak hour is different, if that makes sense.
Any other questions?
I think everybody's got the same general concern, is just the number of parking spaces. And I mean, granted, that's your profession, and I would agree that it would be, ridiculous to design something that you're gonna have tenants that are gonna say, this just doesn't work, we're gonna move all the time.
It's gotta work.
Still struggle with those. I mean, the numbers they just do seem low.
Yeah, and I understand that. I mean, I can understand sitting in your seat, it can be initially concerning. But I guess, our response is, based on our experience, and if you look at our portfolio of real estate, you can see that I'd like to think that you could see that we know what we're doing. And we love your community. We're happy to be here again. And we're just really excited about bringing this neighborhood type use to that corner, so that it's not just a standalone with one offering. It's something that we can bring to the community that truly will benefit all, and bring different offerings to the table that are not here today, like we did with the northeast corner.
George?
I have a question regarding the loading and unloading of trucks. And where exactly would you suggest that they would pull in? It says front yard.
Yeah, so once again, because of the restrictions of the site and the size of the site,
Yep.
and the size of the users, the deliveries that'll be made here will be stake truck deliveries. So there's no semi needs here. So a semi is not going to pull in here and have to mitigate through the site. And the unloading and loading would have to take place at times of the day where they're not going to be interfering with business, i.e. after hours or early morning hours. Because it's just not your conventional site where we have rear accessibility.
Right.
To, once again, we feel very strongly in the drive-through. And in similar fashion, I can remember when we were before you with the Taco Bell site and the drive-through there. That was something that, we worked very hard on to convince not only this board, but also neighboring environments there, that this drive-through at that location was much needed. In similar fashion here, feel very strongly that this is going to be a coffee user. And the coffee user, tenant obviously needs the drive-through. And there's no way to lay this site out with a drive-through except with what you see before you this evening.
Well, first of all, in regards to the Taco Bell site, the neighbors behind you love you. What you guys did, they've talked to me quite a bit about that.
And we work with them. They were excellent to work with.
Moving into the other side and that type of thing. The only other thing that comes to mind is, I know you have some thoughts as to who you want to move in there, but there's no guarantee that somebody might move out and somebody else might move in there.
Correct.
Would change the delivery arrangement or something like that, which affects the parking to me. So, I don't know if you have any type of answer for that, or?
Well, the only thing I would tell you is, once again, these tenants that we're dealing with of the national level, they're very specific with their needs. And obviously, facilitating their deliveries is an important aspect. So they get that. And we find it in most situations where sites are tight like this, and they're in village communities and downtown communities, that we can work it out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Potter, anybody else? Yes, Rick?
I mean, granted, each location and each variance that we approve is based on its own merits, but I do want to just reference this. What this reminds me of, in the stacking with the driving lane and the drive-through, reminds me a lot of the building at Stearns and Lewis. Very small parking lane on the south side of the building. They get to the east side, they turn to the north. Again, not a lot of room for tractor-trailer access to be coming in and out of there. Granted, there's only 2 businesses there, but again, very limited. So this reminds me a lot of that. Now, I don't know how many parking spaces are there. I can't say for sure, but there could be even less than what I see here. I don't know if anybody can perceive that site in their head. I should have thought of that one ahead of time.
I know which one you're talking about.
Are we talking about the southeast?
Southeast corner over there too. And by looking at this, I would say that the parking spaces, again, are very similar to this entire diagram.
It is, with only 2 tenants.
And with 2
one being a
tenants.
store.
But again, it's also rated on the size of the usable space too, so. But agreed, you know, yes, the one tenant is a pretty sizable store.
The, staying with the loading and unloading area, I'm not sure about the other 2 businesses that you're talking about, but the restaurants, at least the ones that I'm familiar with, they don't really have a whole lot of control over their delivery time. Their delivery times are dictated by the people they're buying their supplies from, and the size of the truck is dictated by how many customers that supplier is delivering to on their route. So I don't know, it's conceivable to me to at least have both the restaurants, and maybe, I mean, there could be 2, maybe 3 delivery trucks coming in there at the same time, and if that's the case, then your parking situation is shot, pretty much.
I agree with you, and once again, with the, for example, and you have a Tim Hortons in your community already, but Tim Hortons, they have specific timeframes that they can receive deliveries. And the different users that we're considering have very specific timelines for deliveries in similar fashion to a Tim Hortons facility. If you note, I mean, if you pay attention, you'll see that they won't receive any deliveries during their peak time. It's etched in stone. And same holds true with the type of truck that delivers to their sites. So when they go to smaller sites like this, that's all mandated in their agreement with their purveyors.
So the restaurants that you're proposing are larger chains that are able to dictate more of that.
We're looking to bring fast casual dining to the site, and as I mentioned, the drive-through is being somewhat launched and predicated on coffee, and we have allocated the opposite end cap for a restaurant as well. And to your point, as each of these spaces become a reality, we would have to consider the the individual spaces and the parking that would go along with it. So as much as we, have allocated 2 restaurant locations, there's still an opportunity where perhaps one of them is not restaurant. But at the end of the whole process, we have to back into that parking calc. So I guess I would use limited to what we can ultimately do if this were to be granted and approved. We have to back into the parking allocations.
Just to vouch for that, there's a little bit of candor on the delivery piece. I mean, I work for a large manufacturer, and no matter if we're bigger than our customer or not, it doesn't matter. They dictate the delivery. They dictate when, what type of means of transport. So I'm not really concerned about the delivery, just if that sets you guys at ease. In most cases, the customer sets the precedent, not the distributor or whoever's supplying the materials.
Thanks, Jake, that's good.
Okay. But I'm just saying smaller, the larger chains or the larger businesses may be able to do that, but I don't know that the smaller ones are.
Our smallest customers dictate how we deliver to them.
Really?
Yes, yes.
Okay. The restaurants I deliver to are not like that. Any other, yes, Tom?
2 things. That's an interesting point you brought up. I'm not a big Tim Hortons customer, but I drive by 5 of them a day. You're right, I've never seen a truck there between 7 and 8:30 in the morning, ever, that I can remember. But my main point is this, based on, we don't even have to base on what you've already built. You guys seem like you're on top of your game.
Thank you.
I have lived in this area since 1975. Your site that you're proposing to build on has looked awful for 35 years. It's been a class whatever contaminated site for I don't know how long. It's nice to see something finally happening there. I know Steve Lennox, who was a realtor, had a sign there that said, best spot in Bedford Township. Well, he's right location-wise, but it hasn't been available for 40 years. It was either a gas station or a petroleum dumping ground. And I was so happy to see MDEQ get in there and really get after it.
The MDEQ did a beautiful job, and
I mean, they had more equipment there than I know I even realized that they would use for something like that.
don't hold me to these statistics or numbers, but my memory serves me correctly. They exported over 300,000 gallons, or treated over 300,000 gallons of contaminated groundwater, and they exported over 150,000 yards of soil. Wow. And with export, you need import.
Yeah.
So if you just do some unit calculations to what they did there, granted it's our tax dollars, but to get them to take the initiative to pick this specific site to do it is a great accomplishment, and it says a lot about your community as well, because they wanted to do it. So kudos.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comments? I noticed, well, I'd like to address the access and egress to the property from Secor and Stearns. That's a high-traffic area, and I noticed on the drawing, there's, for each of the access egress locations, there's only one exit lane. So if somebody's exiting, turning left, they may have to, onto either road, it doesn't matter. There's a lot of traffic, they're gonna be waiting a while, thus everybody that wants to turn out of there as well during those rush hour periods, they're gonna be held up by waiting for the person or people turning left. It appears that if you put 2 exit lanes in, you'd be losing another couple parking spaces. But it seems like for the benefit of the businesses there, as well as the benefit and satisfaction of their customers. They want to get in and out quick, especially if they're going for coffee. They don't want to wait.
Right.
They'll just make them late to work. And
The opportunity we have here, so if you're trying, let's say, for example, you're trying to get directly out onto Stearns Road,
mhm.
and you saw there was someone queued in this location trying to make a left, you have the opportunity actually to circulate the site and make a right turn out, and then make the left, if that's what you want to do, or make a right, or wherever you can. And the same thing here. You see that? You can circulate the site.
Mhm. Oh, I understand.
Yeah.
But there's all sorts of scenarios. You could
Right,
have
yeah,
5
right.
cars trying to get out at the
Yeah.
same time.
It's tough when we lay out a site and design for, the worst case scenario. Again, the limitations here were the parking. As soon as we add in another exit lane or a turn lane, that does reduce our parking on site. We did feel that that was a bigger concern, was the parking for this property, not necessarily the once a week or, the weekend peak hour where we have all this traffic in the property. Now, we did get these locations and the access preliminarily approved by the county. So, they have seen this, and they are on board with that.
Yeah, but the county's not going to be the one that your businesses are going to be complaining to.
Situation across the street.
No, on all those other 4 corners, there's 2 exit lanes for every one of those businesses on every access egress point. I checked that out.
At the Taco Bell as well?
Mhm. Yeah, you can turn either way.
So it's 3-point, you're saying? I can't recall.
I believe it is.
I know they
I think so. I haven't had any problem getting out either way from Taco Bell.
It's been a while, and I mean, at the end, I think the truth of the matter is, it's definitely a busy intersection. I
Yes.
mean, it's very busy. It's Main and Main. So it's definitely congested, but it's part of a 4-point intersection as well that's lit.
Well, it seemed like with, aside from, say, Taco Bell's only 1, I think it's 2, but even if it's only 1, Taco Bell's 2 businesses down the road.
Right.
Here, we're looking at just the intersection, and it seems like with Walgreens, the gas station, and Tim Hortons, any place in there, people have the ability to turn right without waiting for somebody to turn left.
Yeah,
And here, you're not giving them that opportunity.
agreed.
May I interrupt a second, please?
Sure.
The control room asked that you gentlemen speak into the mic, one move out of the way and the other take turns or something, whatever. Thank you.
If I may. I just wanted to remind everyone that the variances granted this evening would be applied to a site plan that would then go to the Planning Commission for review and approval. Any site plan submitted would then be reviewed and approved by the Monroe County Drain Commission, the Monroe County Road Commission, Township Engineer, and the Bedford Township Fire Department. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't express your concern. It's just that I wanted to remind you that
Thank you,
this will
Karen.
go through site plan approval process.
I have a question for you. Can the planning commission talk about size of the truck deliveries or times? Any restrictions along those lines? That was the only real problem I had was I've seen McDonald's trucks, they got the big ones.
Well, the planning commission doesn't normally do that.
Okay, that's,
And Jake probably knows that, and Tom. But as all of you know, when you grant a variance, the law allows you to attach to the granting of a variance any reasonable conditions that you may want to impose. So I don't know if you necessarily want to get into dictating what delivery times will be. I think that's better left to the developer, the landlord, and the tenant to work that out, and for us to focus on whether there are a sufficient number of parking spaces for the proposed use and the proposed number of tenants and the proposed types of tenants, and focus in on that. It's a good point to raise, and the Planning Commission certainly can look at it and discuss it, but that's the type of condition that probably is best left to the user as opposed to us dealing with here. Because it really deals with, there could be different types of businesses going in there. They have a plan, a business model, but depending on who wants to go in and who doesn't want to go in will dictate certain of those requirements.
Yeah, I'm not so,
I guess I was suggesting, not that we do, I just wanted to know if they, well, you said they haven't done it, and Jake, your input there meant a lot from your business, but I just didn't know they hadn't.
Yeah,
done that.
we have the legal authority to do it. And if somebody was going to place a condition on the granting of a variance, it should happen here as opposed to at the Planning Commission. So if you feel strongly that there should be a condition placed on any one of the variances being requested here, that should be incorporated into any motion.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Fowler?
yes.
I will just quickly comment too, as well, being from manufacturing and transportation side. It would be extremely difficult to try to put any kind of restriction on a truck. You never know for sure with the technology and all the changes in trucking and transportation. I mean, who knows, they may eventually get their deliveries with a drone. I mean, it sounds far-fetched, but they're talking about, automated vehicles, they're talking about, who knows, we might even be flying like the Jetsons one day. I mean, it sounds far-fetched, but I don't think it is, with everything else that we're doing with the technology. It would be very difficult, again, with the supplier, because you'd be stacking them up as well, because you'd have to say, well, okay, if that's the only supplier that makes this kind of whatever they're buying, or the only supplier that they can get their product from at the right price, they can get it from the guy over here that he's twice the price and he's got that tiny truck, you're not going to buy from the high price guy. So you want to be real careful. I don't think I would touch the truck. I mean, again, they're working their business. They're working with the right types of business, it sounds like to me, that they know what they need for their business. They know what they need to order. And as Jake said, you're the customer. And if the customer says, you will bring it to me in a straight truck, or you'll bring it to me in a cargo van, and you're going to bring it to me at between this window time, if you want to sell to somebody as your customer, you're going to listen.
Actually, all I asked was, does the planning ever do that?
Right.
So I wasn't saying I was going to suggest that at all.
Yeah, again, our information, of course, the planning commission, I'm sure will hear what we're talking about too, so
I
that's
just
the
don't
only
know
reason
if
I
they've
want to
ever
bring it up.
done that.
Yeah,
They did when I was on it.
That's.
yeah,
it's
and I
very
too, I don't
difficult
want to get into a
enforce.
situation where I'm dictating delivery times. I just wanted to
Get a couple-
explore the idea of what happens if you get more than one delivery truck in there at the same time. Karen?
If I may?
Yes.
Mr. Chair, we have not opened this up. I mean, we've opened the public hearing, but we haven't opened up the possible comment and closed the public hearing after that.
I know.
We may want to ask.
Okay. Are there any more questions for the representatives? Hearing none. Are there any questions from other folks here, the general public, on this item? If there are, please approach the podium, give your name and address.
My name is Sean Shkwana. I live at 2546 Hasten Drive in Lambertville. I'm also here as a representative for Bennett Management Corp., who operates the Burger King right next door to this site. Honestly, I showed up here today just to kind of be nosy and see what was going on. I had no intention of coming up here and saying anything. As the conversation went on, some things kind of came up, not to go against you, but you had said you don't expect people to stay at the property very long. The Burger King we operate next door, out of the 25 that we operate, is not a very high-volume Burger King, and we often have customers that sit in there for an hour, hour and a half. This isn't an urban area. This isn't Toledo, Ohio. Our customers here in Bedford Township, they come in, they, especially you're talking about coffee. People come in the morning, they want to read their papers, they want to sit. And our Burger King parking lot, again, not being a very busy Burger King in comparison to some of our other ones, we often have 5 or 6 employee cars, and that front parking lot can get filled up very quickly. So that's just something to consider. Another thing he had said was you have the ability to control your delivery times. I think with national chains such as Burger King, some of that ability goes away. It's easier when you've got your choice of vendors to be able to say, well, if you're not going to deliver at my time or the way I say, then I'll go to somebody else. With Burger King, we don't have that ability. And I think with large national chains, they lose some of that ability. They're restricted on who they can order from. And the only other thing he had said that kind of stood out to me, he said, you can tell the deliveries to come in when it's not your peak business times. But in the same sentence, he said, the 4 businesses will have different peak times. So tenant A might be getting a delivery time that's convenient for them, but the parking lot might be jammed up by customers coming in for, tenants B, C, and D. So again, I wasn't intending to come up here and say anything, but some of the discussion that went on, it just kind of stood out to me that, doing this and the Burger Kings and everything we kind of come across, I just don't know if it would really work, and I think it would add to a lot of congestion here in, Bedford Township. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Name and address, please.
Robert Ruiz, we'll go with 7300 Secor Road. We own the Deer Creek Commons, just down the street from the proposed site. First off, love that the hard corner here is finally having something done with it. I think Tom's comment rings true. It's about time. And we're definitely happy with the MDQ and everything that was done there to remediate the property. I don't know if I can ask a question, but has a WB67 been done on this proposed lot to understand the traffic flow, especially for deliveries, and what capacity and load can be done in that lot? No, okay. I just wondered, I guess for your benefit, it might help ease some concerns. All right, so from my standpoint as an investor in the community, we own several shopping centers in the area. One of the draws for us to be in Bedford Township is the uniformity and the consistency within the commercial developments. You, as a township, have done an excellent job in maintaining a consistent look throughout. I do have concerns, though, about this proposed layout. The trash enclosure, I think, is a big concern when you're talking about main and main here. And the fact that you do have dump deliveries coming in, and you have it right adjacent to an entrance off of Secor Road, which is a very busy thoroughway. So as you have trash trucks loading and unloading, especially in a morning user, and you have an adjacent drive-through, I think you're looking at stacking issues that should be taken into consideration. 2 restaurants, 2 retail units, obviously. The parking is going to be a vital component to this, and if you're dealing with national tenants, typically they have parking requirements as part of their set requirements in order to consider a site. And I don't know if that's been discussed or considered. I don't know if you have tenants in line for this. But as we look at this, having 2 properties right on Secor Road, we invested, or we agreed to be and participate in what my understanding is the business improvement district, where we were looking at wider sidewalks for greater walking traffic, lighting, park benches to provide a welcoming environment for pedestrian traffic for the neighborhood. And if we are talking about eliminating setbacks in green space, how does that play into that scenario? Are we then just going backwards on everything that we had agreed to participate in, and I believe is going to be underway this spring? And has that been taken into consideration? So although I am very happy, and I don't know if there's alterations to this footprint that could maybe be done, whether it's lessening the building size or offering less units in order to conform with what has already been established, I ask that those things be considered, because it is definitely a drawing force for investors like us who look for consistency. We do have tight corner plazas, and they do present challenges. And as we all know, there is turnover in our industry, the commercial real estate industry, the retail side of things, and demands vary greatly. And so it's not only proposing for now, it is proposing for the long term. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Seeing none, I have a motion to close the public hearing.
Make a motion to close the public hearing?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, public hearing's closed. Are there any comments or questions?
So really, I think the elephant in the room is, does this proposed site, the square footage, did that create a reason for the variances? Is the facility itself too large for the site? And that's my main question here. That could be causing a lot of the concerns with the variances around green spaces, could be causing it around, you know, what was the other one? The amount of parking, right? So if you lose one retail location here or one restaurant location out of this location, that frees up a lot of the problems that we have with the site. So could the proposed property as is be too ambitious, creating a lot of these needs for variances?
For the,
My main question.
too ambitious for the
Yep.
size of the
Correct.
property?
It is a very tight space, extremely tight for what's being proposed.
Okay, Dennis or Jody or Karen, is the amount of spaces required based on, is that, maybe that's what you asked?
Right, it's
Based on the size of the building or the number of units within the building?
It's based on the usable floor space with each specific use.
Right.
So if the building stayed the same size, but there were only 3 units, there would be less?
As long as you don't reduce the usable floor space and you don't change the use. Some uses require more spaces per usable square footage of space, and some require less. For instance, if you take a look at, in here when I broke it down, actually the applicant broke it down. For retail, it's 100 square feet of, one for each 100 square feet of usable floor space. For a drive-through restaurant with seating, it is 50 square feet of usable floor space, requires 1. And then if you have establishments for sale and consumption on the premises, it's 1 for every 75 square feet. So your parking requirements are based on the use and the usable floor space within that particular unit. You back out your prep areas, your storage areas, your restrooms, and your hallways.
So if that were the case, if you remove, say, one retail location and squeeze them together, or maybe it's not a restaurant on one end, that could potentially relieve some of the variance issues.
Yes, George.
And as usual, excuse me, as usual with any of these things that we've talked about what you want to do, but we don't know what's going to happen in the future, who's going to move in after this, who's going to move in after that, and I think we have to keep that in mind while we consider this.
That's right. Yes, Tom?
I have to agree with Jake. When I first took a look at this picture, even though I was happy to see where it was going to be, I thought, this picture is packed. There's really no room here. But I've been somewhat convinced that it might work. As far as parking, when they built the Kroger Plaza, I was on the planning commission first go around, and Karen, how many spaces are at Kroger? 700?
I don't remember, but it was.
It was to the point where we looked foolish, the planning commission. This past Christmas Eve, I couldn't find a parking spot in that lot. So times change. At the time, you know, it looked like they could have built 3 or 4 outlot buildings because of spaces weren't being used. But I couldn't believe it this Christmas. My wife, I went for sour cream or something, and she said, "Where have you been?" I said, "Trying to find a parking spot," if you can believe that. So things can change. And there's some empty spaces, I think, in that plaza right now that aren't occupied by customers. That's it. That's all I have.
Okay, Tom?
And another concern during the winter when there's snow, where are you going to put the snow?
Yeah. I'm sure that impacted it.
Well, if there's no more questions, are we at a point where we can start looking at motions on these 4 variances?
Board members, I do want to point out a couple items. One, if we look at this lines here,
Yes.
by zoning ordinance, that is the building setback. So our building could be all the way to those limits there as well. So if we look at this, again, because of the restrictions of the double lot frontage, we've had to push our building into that southeast corner. Now, we could extend, in theory here, our building all the way out to this line here. Granted, the use may have to change, but we can extend the square footage, and it's really based on use. So really what we're trying to ask for tonight is the restaurant user, potentially, again, that could change, but any other use change within this, the shopping center would have to go back in front of you. Is that correct?
Technically, it is supposed to be presented to the planning department so we can recalculate the parking requirements.
And so then any additional, so any new tenant that came in that had a higher parking demand than what we're looking to put in here would have to come, if it was a variance, or would have to go in front of the commissions again. So you would have a second say or a second go around on any different uses.
Okay, so that would go for your concern.
Any of the uses will ultimately have to go through planning and work back into the calculation of the approved parking. So if the variance were to be granted this evening on the parking, we have to back into that number. We can't exceed that number with the use that we bring. We could potentially bring, based on this drawing this evening, 2 users, and we would be just fine. But we had to establish some form in order to, and we're comfortable with what we're presenting and the number of spots that we're presenting. And as much that I appreciate the comments from the neighbors who are here this evening, we have to also keep in mind that any potential competition to this market is at times mentally concerning. But once again, we're confident in what we're proposing. And at the end of the day, it's our real estate that we have to make sure has long-term longevity for the betterment of everyone, the community, the tenants who are there, and ultimately us as long-term owners. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Yes.
So, I mean, if we do grant a variance and kind of allow the planning commission to review the uses, we're already setting the variances. They're already there. If the uses change, what's going to allow the planning commission to then go back and say, well, we need to add more spots? Where do you add it?
And you wouldn't, and if that happened, we would have to be back in front of you to request the variances for the additional parking spaces for those uses. So you would, again, get a second say if the use changes or the demand changes.
If you do that, you better add a condition that if the use changes, it has to come back to this board for recalculation of the required number of parking spaces. that's the only way you're going to get it back to this board, for sure. It's got to be conditional.
But 10 years down the road, would it ever come back to the board? I mean, conceivably, how?
I think I think what Jake is talking about is more short-term than long-term, because once a variance is granted, just like the developer says, they have to back into it. Well, if their business model changes and their plan changes, and they go in front of the planning commission and they change the use, and if it requires more parking spaces than what has been granted by this board, it would come back in the near future.
Okay.
I think rather
Right.
than 10 years down the road.
Okay, I was thinking,
could.
after everything got approved and then tenants changed down the road.
It could, Bob, if, for instance, there was a material change in the site plan and it had to go again through planning, and as long as you make it conditional. And so I'm not advocating one way or the other, but if you do that, Jake is right. If you set the number, that's the number. Unless it comes back here because of a material change in the use, the number of tenants, or the number of spaces that they propose. Right now, there's 4 spaces. So, and you also look at, you're well-versed in the concept of practical difficulty, and, a practical difficulty can sometimes be created by the applicant, by what they do on their parcel of property. And you have to ask your question, you have to question yourself, is a practical difficulty being created by the applicant here? And Jake touched on this, by the number of units in this particular building. Is it too tight for this particular parcel of property at this particular intersection, which has a very high traffic volume? Those are things that you think about.
Okay. Thank you, Phil. Well, are the board members ready to make any proposals for each one of these 4 variances? How about the variance to allow parking within the front yard setback? Is there a motion? To approve or deny?
I'll make a motion that we approve the variance in the front yard setback. I see no reason that this is not consistent with the local neighborhood, and I think it is in keeping with the flow of the main roads there.
I'll second.
Okay. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Pardon me?
I'm going to ask you whether or not you should consider as a condition that, along with allowing parking in the front yard setback, that it not be, Jake touched on this, it's consistent, but with the downtown development authority there and the sidewalks and things of that nature, that allowances are made so that the sidewalks are there along with the necessary green space, so that it creates the pedestrian traffic flow in that area. And maybe that's not an issue, but I think it's something you should think about in connection with allowing vehicular parking within the front yard setback. That there's going to be the sidewalks there as envisioned by the Downtown Development Authority that will allow pedestrian traffic to circulate among these various businesses that are already there and that are coming, and there are more coming to the east of this site.
If it helps at all, we've already granted those easements that they've requested on both sides of the street.
That does help.
We did it along our northeast already, and we did it there.
That does help.
So the DDA has it.
Okay, that does help.
I'll amend my motion to make sure that we also make it conditional upon allowing, I'll say, the walkability or the easement to allow for walkability along the Secor corridor there.
And maybe not to encroach upon the DDA
And not to
development.
encroach upon the DDA development.
Okay, is that
So that's sort of his amendment with a friendly amendment, and I agree.
okay? Any other discussion? Karen, would you like to call the roll?
Mr. Lake?
Yes.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Welling?
Aye.
Mr. Zebek?
Aye.
Mr. Potter?
Aye.
Motion carried.
Okay, how about the variance to allow trash enclosure in the front yard? Anybody like to address that with either approve or deny the variance request?
Go for double trouble. I'll make a motion that we approve the variance to allow trash enclosure within the front yard. Seeing that the property is quite tight on space and due to the ingress egress, I think that that's the most logical location for it.
Support? Anybody? Ooh,
I'll second. But let's mention.
I'll amend my motion to ensure that we have the facade that matches that of the building along with the gates that were proposed tonight.
Accepted.
okay, any discussion? Karen? No. Tom? Anybody?
Nope.
Okay, Karen, would you call the roll?
Mr. Lake?
Yes.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Zebek?
Aye.
Mr. Welling?
Aye.
Mr. Potter?
Aye.
Motion carried.
Okay. How about the variance of 22 required parking spaces? Who would like to attack that?
Mr. Potter?
Yeah.
Just real quick, we probably should have flipped that because we just did the variance on the loading and unloading within the front yard, but we still need the variance to allow the trash enclosure within the front yard, right?
No, we did the trash enclosure.
We have not
did
done
not
the
do the
loading and
loading and
unloading in the
unloading.
front yard yet.
Okay,
We can do loading and unloading first, that's fine
I
with
mean,
me.
they go together, so. I would make the motion to allow the variance to allow loading and unloading within the front yard to the southwestern corner of the property based on the most accessible ingress, egress for the trash companies.
No.
Not trash.
I'm sorry,
Just
the,
Deliver, unloading, yeah.
I'm sorry, never mind, wrong one. Unloading.
Yeah.
Support? Anybody?
Are you looking for support?
I'm looking for support, yes.
George,
I'll
I thought
support
George did. I heard a support over there.
Oh, all right.
Okay,
Me?
George, all right. No,
it was Tom.
Oh, okay.
now.
Okay, so, all
I
right,
backed into
any,
that one.
Who's on first?
any further discussion? Karen, would you call the roll?
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Zebek?
Aye.
Mr. Lake?
Yes.
Mr. Welling?
Aye.
Mr. Potter?
Aye.
Motion carried.
Okay, and then the last one, the variance of 22 required parking spaces.
I can make a motion on this one as well. I'm actually going to make a motion that we do not approve the variance for the required 22 parking spaces. My reasoning is that I believe, based on the size and ambition of the piece or of the building, that the needed variance was self-created. The difficulty was self-created in this case.
I'd like to second that with an amendment. I'm always concerned about safety, and I think we're right at the peak of what we can do with that corner, including what you said about having just one lane to turn left out of and that type of thing. I don't think it'll be that easy, so I would like to add a safety concern on top of his motion.
Could I make a comment? Hearing you, could I speak?
I don't know.
Well,
Sure, go ahead.
Thank you. Hearing your concern on the parking loud and clear, could I ask that we table the request on the parking and let us go back and see if we can reevaluate the parking scenario to the gross leasable area of the building and come back before your body in regard to that request? So that it's not denied here this evening.
I don't know. Phil?
You can do that. Do you want to deny that variance, or excuse me, no, of course you don't. Do you want to withdraw that variance request at this point and re-present it at a later time?
Either withdrawal or just I don't know if a tabling occurrence is possible. But we want to come before you.
Be better to withdraw
at a
and
later
then bring it
date.
back later.
It can be, it could be tabled if the board elects to do that, but what we want to do is to have it brought back at a date certain.
Yeah, we're not looking for, believe me, we want to get going here. So this is not something that we're looking to table for some, I would say within the next 60 days, we reappear with the ambition to come back within 30.
The meetings are held generally on the first Monday of each month. It was different because of the holiday and
Sure.
conflict with this room yesterday. But do we know whether we have any variance requests scheduled for the month of February 2018 yet, Karen or Jody?
We do,
We do. So,
but the deadline for that is Friday.
There you go.
okay, for
So it would be the
publication.
following.
If you wanted to bring it back, if the board wants to table it to the March meeting, you can do that. Otherwise, it would just have to be withdrawn and brought back at the discretion of the developer.
If,
Couldn't he come to the next meeting? It's already been posted, no tabling it here.
that's why I'm asking for the tabling, I
All
guess.
he's saying is bring more information.
I said, wouldn't it be old business at that point?
That would be my desire if it was granted by your board.
We wouldn't have to republish, it's already published.
If you table it, we don't have to republish. So if you table it to next meeting, the February meeting, that gives you your date certain. And if the applicant is not ready at that time, you could table it again to the following meeting in March. But it's been published. If you table it to bring it back, that way the public has notice that it's going to be back in front of the board at the February meeting. What date will that
February
be?
5th?
February 5th, 2018. Is that acceptable? Do you think you can have?
Well, the
things ready?
deadline is Friday.
Well,
Well,
you've already published?
it's been published, so that
So we're-
deadline doesn't apply.
I think we can meet that, no problem.
Okay.
We would have to have the material prior to that. It would have to be submitted,
So in the next 10 days,
yes.
considering today's the 10th, if we got it to you by the 20th, is that
Or
acceptable?
the week of the week of the 22nd, because the 20th is on a
We'll do it.
Saturday.
We'd appreciate that very much if you would so grant us that tabling occurrence.
Do we have to rescind the motion that we just made?
Jake would
Rescind
need,
it, yeah,
if Jake wants to, he would need to withdraw the motion, and if it's been seconded, that second would need to be withdrawn. Then a new motion would need to be made to table action on that specific variance request for the 22 parking spaces variance, and then for it to be taken up again at the next meeting, February 5th, 2018.
That's fair. I'll remove my,
Well, should we, I don't, do any of the board members have a problem with that?
No, I
Tabling?
don't.
Okay.
It's up to Jake.
no, yeah, I'll remove my motion. I think that's fair.
And I remove my second.
All right, someone, if you so choose, will need to motion to table, to make a motion to table the matter, and then a vote to be taken on that motion. Seconded, and then a vote to be taken.
Since I started, I'll
Yeah, you've done it.
finish. I'll make a motion that we allow for the applicant to recalculate and come back to us at the next meeting, or therefore table or make it old business on the next agenda.
I'll second that one.
Discussion? Karen, would you like to call the roll?
Mr. Lake?
Yes.
Mr. Welling?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Zebek?
Aye.
Mr. Potter?
Aye.
Motion carried.
Now,
Thank you.
what in heaven's name did I do with the agenda? Here we are. Okay,
Public comment.
public comment. Is there any comment from any of the other public here on anything we covered today? Hearing none. Any comments from the board and staff?
Again, we do have a variance in for the February 5th meeting along with this, so you will be receiving your packets on the requests.
Okay,
that we
thank you,
have.
folks, for being here and for coming back next month.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I interrupted. Phil?
Nothing, thank you.
Dennis? Jody? Tom?
Nothing?
George?
Yes, I do. The exciting part is for you folks watching on Bedford Cable, it is now being shown on YouTube at the same time in a clearer picture, better presentation. So if you go to the township website, you will find where you click on it to watch it on YouTube now. Thank you.
Thank you, George. I have no comments besides thank you for your help. And Rick?
I would just like to add to that and say thank you for our camera team that has developed this for the township. Really, really has done a great job.
And more to come.
Pleasure to be on the board here.
Welcome. Yes.
Worked with you before, Jake. Like, happy to see you here.
Okay, I propose we adjourn the meeting. So adjourned.